Lighting is something that I'm incredibly interested in. It's something that I've really focused on over the past year or so, and it's something that I always try my best to improve at. But it has to be said that having a good light to work with is also part of the process, and having something that's reliable and versatile is incredibly useful. Aputure have just released the 120D Mark II, which is an incremental upgrade over the previous 120D, and as someone who uses a lot of Aputure lights, I mean pretty much my entire lighting setup is made up of them, I thought it'd be interesting to check this thing out. According to the spec sheet, it's 30% brighter than the previous version. It now has DMX control, which is going to be useful for those of you who use that. It's more color accurate than the previous design, and also it has some new special effects. So if you want to recreate lightning or paparazzi, then you can do that inside the actual hardware of the light, which is, I mean, that's going to be useful in certain situations. So all in all, I'm very impressed with this new version of the 120D Mark II. Is it going to replace the old 120D? If you already own a 120D, should you be throwing it out and getting this thing? Probably not, but if you're in the market for a new light, I would seriously consider the 120D Mark II over the old 120D. It's a decent upgrade. So now what we're going to try and do is we're going to put it through its paces and see how well it performs if it's the only light that we have for the shoots. One light lighting setup. This first one is what I like to call the window light, and this is supposed to imitate morning sunlight coming in through the window. So what we did is we sat Vicky down on the sofa, and then we put the camera at a fairly extreme angle to her. Then we grabbed the 120D and put a Fresnel lens on the front of it and put that outside the window pointing in. And the reason we use the Fresnel lens is because we want to focus in that light as much as possible so that we can really imitate sunlight streaming in. Now, to accentuate this, I actually got my fog machine and filled the room with fog, and then I dispersed it using a 5-in-1 by just wafting it around, and that gives us a thin layer of haze, which means that the actual light beams are visible in the camera, which makes it look, I don't know, it adds a certain depth to it. Now, to increase this feeling of depth, I actually turned on the practical light, which is next to the sofa, and that gives us a change in color temperature and creates a nice feel to the scene. Next up, we've got beauty lighting. Now, the goal for this setup is to get a symmetrical look with very soft light and to eliminate any unflattering shadows. So we set Vicky up directly in front of the camera, and then I grabbed the 120D Mark II and put that pretty much above the camera, chucked a softbox on the front of it, and pointed it downwards at about a 45-degree angle coming in on top of Vicky's face. Then, to get rid of the shadows underneath the eyes and underneath the chin, we get the 5-in-1 reflector with the silver side pointing up, and we put that at about a 45-degree angle pointing upwards between the camera and where Vicky is sitting. This gives us a really nice flat look, and the thing that I especially like about it is the catch lights that you get in the eyes. It just really brings them to life. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, which is the hairline. Now, this is a very low-key look, and it starts off with Vicky facing away from the camera and the 120D in front of Vicky facing towards the camera. Now, we've got a softbox on the front of it so that we get a nice roll-off of light on the shoulders, and we also have a grid on front of the softbox to make sure that the light doesn't spill out and affect everything in the scene. Then on either side of that setup, we have the two practical lights on in the kitchen, which just adds the symmetry to the framing and makes it all look good. And then to accentuate this entire lighting setup, once again, I got my fog machine out and we filled the entire place with haze. Now, this just creates a softer environment. It means that you lose details here and there, and you also get the feeling of light coming in from the ceiling, which is something that I personally really like. So I think that just about covers it. That is the Aputure 120D Mark II, used and abused. I really enjoyed making this video. There are a few lighting setups that didn't make it in, including this one inspired by La La Land. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one.